All right, y'all can grab your seats. I don't want to break this up. Hopefully, y'all can connect over coffee and donuts because what better things to connect over after service? My name is Blake. I'm one of the pastors here, and I started in ministry back in 2010, and I had no idea what I was getting into. My first job was actually pretty awesome because my job was essentially to plan social events, service events, and mission trips for all of my friends because I was leading a young adult ministry. And I was an intern. I was low man on the totem pole. I had basically no pressure on me, and it was kind of great. And then I remember getting my first big boy pastor job, and I was like, okay, all right, there's a little more pressure. I'm feeling a little more of this. I have people reporting to me now, overseeing ministries, and I felt like there was a little more to do. And it felt like with each passing month, there was more and more that would come onto my plate. And I found myself in this place in 2017 where I was overseeing 12 different ministries or large events. And then in November of that year, we had to let our youth pastor go. And so because we were in the middle of the school year, we decided it would be better for me and another guy on our staff to oversee youth ministry until the end of the year so we could hire somebody. And so I was doing 13 things. I was essentially working 3 jobs at this point because I also do real estate. And so I had youth ministry, real estate, and all the stuff I was doing for the church. And then in early 2018, we found out that Britt was pregnant with Addison. So I don't know if I've shared with you about Britt's pregnancies, but suffice it to say, the first 16 weeks of her pregnancies, she's down for 20 to 22 hours a day. Like, just can't move, is horribly sick. And so this is a snapshot of my life at this time. I was not being the type of father I wanted to be. I was not being the type of husband I wanted to be. I just was completely exhausted. And I was out at a pastor's conference in California, and I was walking with a friend to dinner, and he asked me, "How are you doing?" And this seemingly innocuous question left me with a choice. I could tell him, "Hey, I'm fine," because that's what you say. "I'm fine. Things are good. How lovely is the weather out here in California right now?" Or I could tell the truth. And I opted for the latter, which in hindsight was a mistake, but I said that I'm struggling. I said, I'm hurting. I'm exhausted. I'm not being a good husband to Brittany right now. I'm not being a good father to my 2 kids right now. I feel like people use the analogy of burning the candle at both ends, and I don't even feel like that describes my life right now. Like, I just took the candle and I just threw it in the furnace. And I have nothing left to give right now. And he looked at me and was like, "Yeah, I've had some tough times in ministry too," and kept walking. And I remember just kind of being stunned for a moment, and for the first time since I had started in ministry was thinking about quitting. And I called Britt and I was like, "You need to convince me not to quit my job right now." And with the baby on the way, she was pretty persuasive that it was not a good idea for me to quit my job. But I just remember sitting in that moment and being like, man, that was not how I saw that going in my head. And why do I tell you this story? Well, first, I hope it's so that all of you will come and give me hugs and tell me that you're so glad that I didn't quit after ministry. But I'm kidding. Don't inundate me with hugs afterwards. I tell you this because it's a relatable story. We've all been in this place where we have been exhausted. We have been spent. We have nothing left to give. And what we are in need of in that moment is somebody to show us comfort, somebody to love us, somebody to come alongside us in that season and help us through. And that's what we're talking about this morning, is this idea of comforting one another. We've gone through this series in the One Another's where we talked about loving one another and living in harmony with one another. We talked about last week this idea of forgiving one another. And I want to go into comforting one another because this is something that as a body of believers following Jesus, we need to be really good at. But before I dive into the text this morning, I want to pray. So would you guys pray with me? Jesus, I do pray for this morning. I've felt unsettled about this all week. God, this was a gut punch for me because this is something that I know that I struggle at. And I know that, Lord, this is not easy to hear for a lot of people because when we talk about comfort, we think about the things that we need comfort from. And those are painful. Those are hurtful. I know the reality that every single person sitting in this room is going through something. Life is hard, and Lord, we need you. We need your comfort. We need your peace, but we also need to learn to come alongside one another in the midst of this. And so I just pray that as we dig into this morning, that you would help us to learn how to do this better, to learn how to model this to the world, to be a place that is welcoming of those who are broken. God, the church is not this place for everybody to get cleaned up and to make sure that they're perfect and have on their best face. This is a place that is just filled with broken people. Lord, we come to you for healing. We come to you for comfort. We come to one another for community. And that's where we find some of this comfort and peace. And so, Lord, I pray that this would be a place where the broken are comfortable, where they know that they are welcome, they know that they are loved, they know, God, that they will find healing and peace in the midst of this place. And Lord, as I speak this morning, I pray that these are your words and not mine, that you would speak through me in the midst of this and you would allow me to get out of your way. I ask this in your Son's precious name. Amen. So if you would open your Bibles to the book of 2 Corinthians, and in chapter 1, Paul gives us this beautiful passage that talks about comfort. And I'm going to pick up in verse 3, and I'm going to read through verse 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 says this: "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For as we share abundantly in Christ's sufferings, so through Christ we share abundantly in comfort too. If we are afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation, and if we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which you experience when you patiently endure the same sufferings that we suffer. Our hope for you is unshaken, for we know that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in our comfort. For we do not want you to be ignorant, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again." And so this passage is an interesting challenge for us as believers because it acknowledges the fact of suffering, that suffering is a part of our world and it's going to be a part of our world. And if you have been with us at any point in the last year, you've probably seen us talk about these symbols. And these symbols come from a book by Mike Goheen, who is a pastor of missional theology. And we had some of these bracelets made as we went through D3, and it talks about the gospel. And it gives the story of the Bible as one story. And as we work through and as we talk through what this looks like, it's giving us an account. And the way that Goheen describes it, he says, the Bible is a 6-act play. And so you have the creation account. And when you get to the creation account, you see that God created everything good, right? He created the heavens, he created the earth. And at the end of every single day, it says, "And God looked at what he had created, and behold, it was good." And then in Genesis chapter 3, we see this scene with Adam and Eve where they disbelieve God, where they think that God is holding out on them. And so they take the fruit and they eat the fruit. And for the first time in the world, sin is here. Sin enters the picture, and it has now broken this relationship. And from this point on, this becomes this redemption narrative where we are in need of comfort. We're in need of peace. We're in need of love. We are in need of a Savior in the midst of this. And then in Genesis 12, we get the promise. God gives this promise to Abraham where he says, "I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing." And it's not unlike the passage that we see this morning from 2 Corinthians. What he tells Abraham is, "I'm going to bless you in order to be a blessing." In 2 Corinthians, we see this passage that I am going to comfort you in order for you to be a comfort. Everything that God gives us is to be used for the benefit of the body. We are to use the things that God gives us in order to bless other people. And then we see the cross of Jesus, this redemption story that Jesus comes and he dies for our sins, that he gives us a hope in eternity that we didn't previously know we had access to, that we had to have a sacrificial system, but Jesus takes care of that in this redemption story. And then we get to this era right here, which is the church. The church is God's vessel to bring this story of hope and salvation to the world. And there is no backup plan, right? When you look at God's story, he says, you are it. You as the church are to bring this message of hope, this message of the gospel, this message of salvation to people. And you are to be a people that comforts and loves and helps people in the midst of this broken and fallen world. And then that's going to happen until restoration, until Jesus comes and restores all things, until all the broken things that we saw and that we experience on a day-to-day basis are no more. And you can look in Revelation for some beautiful pictures of what that's going to be, that there's going to be no more tears, there's going to be no more death, that God is going to take sin out of this picture. And it is a beautiful picture that we get. So it's important for us to understand that until Jesus comes, we are going to be dealing with pain and suffering. And in the midst of that, we're going to need comfort. So one of the things that I want us to understand as we talk about pain and suffering are some of the things that God is trying to teach us through that. And so there's 4 things that I want to talk about that we can learn from our suffering that I think are helpful for us. First and foremost, what this passage shows us is that bad things happen in order for us to learn how to comfort others. Go back to verses 3 and 4. It says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." And I read this quote from Tony Evans this week, and I wrote it on my board because I just kept coming back to it, and it resonated with me because I know it to be true. He said this, "God allows our troubles because he sees our opportunity coming. He knows someone else will need the benefit of our experience." And I know this to be true for my own life because after going through various sufferings, I see that when somebody else experiences that, I now have a whole new breadth of knowledge to offer to that person in the midst of their pain and their suffering and their hurt. And you know that to be true in your own life. The things that have been the most challenging, that have been the most difficult, God has used for you to bless somebody else and to share that experience with somebody else. There's a quote that you've probably all heard that says, "Don't waste your pain." John Piper takes it a step further. He says, "Don't waste your cancer." Right? You can fill in the blank with whatever that hard thing is in your life. Don't waste that. God has given you that opportunity in order to learn from that, in order to bless other people and to serve other people in the midst of that. Now, the second thing that I see when bad things happen is that they strengthen us. Bad things give us strength because as we endure those things, as we work through those things, we get stronger. James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 says this, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." You need to let it have its full effect. You need to work through that. You can't just ignore it. You can't just bury it. You need to work through the pain so that you can endure and you can strengthen yourself in the midst of that. The third thing that we learn from pain is what we really love. Now, I have 4 kids, and this scenario plays itself out pretty much every day, usually sometime before 7 a.m. We will hear a scream, and I begin to worry about the structural integrity of our house and whether my ears are going to bleed with this scream. So you kind of get a picture of what this is like. And invariably what this is one of my children has taken something away from one of my other children that they believe belongs to them. Right? My kids get so attached to this thing, whether they've had it for 5 seconds or 5 years, it doesn't matter because it's theirs, right? And as I see this scenario play out, and as I watch my kids deal with the anger and frustration and the emotions that come with this, I'm reminded of how we react towards God. When God takes something away from us that we believe is ours or that we believe is God's best for us, when we don't really know, we begin having the same reaction towards God. We may not actually sit on the ground and kick and scream and cry, but inside we have the same reaction. We push back on God. And I remember a couple weeks ago, we were on vacation. We were doing a devotion with the kids that were there, and I was teaching them about Jonah. And there's this picture of Jonah where Jonah goes and he is sent to the Ninevites, and he preaches to the Ninevites, and they all repent. And he gets mad about this, right? Like 500,000 people come to know the Lord, and he's upset because he's like, "God, I knew you would be merciful." And so he goes outside the city, and he sits there and he pouts. And as he's pouting on the ground, this leaf grows up over him and provides him shade. And then a bug comes and eats the leaf, and he's now exposed to the sun and the heat, and he begins complaining to God. And God says, "Do you have a right to complain? Like, did you make this thing grow?" And Jonah's response is, yes, I deserve to be angry enough to die. And this is how we react. Like, "God, yes, I have a right to be angry that you took something that you gave to me away because it was standing in the way of me worshiping you. Yes, I have a right to be angry." But we don't, right? He's revealing an idol that's on our heart, and he's showing us that this good thing, which is a gift from me, is standing in the way of your actual relationship with me. So when we suffer from losing things, we also need to recognize that God may be drawing us back to himself in the midst of this picture that we may have made an idol of a good thing. And one last thing that I see God doing in the midst of our pain is that he's producing an eternal hope. You read about this in 2 Corinthians, which I just read, but I also want you to look at Romans chapter 5. Verses 3 through 5 says this: "More than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." So as we persevere through trials, we're going to develop this hope. If our hope is in this life only, we are of most people to be pitied, right? This is what Paul tells us, that if our hope is in this life and all it has to offer, we will be pitied more than any people, and we should. But our hope is not in this world. It's not in this life. Our hope is in Jesus and in the restoration that he is going to bring, the renewed kingdom that he is going to bring to us. And this is where we have a leg up in offering comfort to the world, is that we can talk about eternal hope, that this world is not all there is, that the brokenness that we experience is not all there is. So the four things that we see: that God allows suffering to teach us how to comfort others, to strengthen us for the road ahead, to break down the idol factory that's in our heart, and to provide eternal hope. Now, the reality that we're all going to face suffering is here, and I have to share that in order to set the stage for the rest of this, for us to understand, okay, here's the problem. Now, what do we do about it? How do we provide comfort? How do we provide hope for people in the midst of this world? And I want you to understand from the jump that these are things that can be learned. Now, some of you may think, like, I'm not very good at comforting people. That's me. That's not my natural bent. There's people like DJ. DJ is an empath. He feels all the feelings of all the people. He is naturally empathic, and he is very, very good at being with people in the midst of their hurt. And that's not necessarily a strength of mine, but that doesn't mean that I'm off the hook. All of us are called in the midst of this to do this. So this is a skill that can be learned, and I want us to focus on four things that we can do in the midst of somebody's grief, in the midst of somebody's pain, to comfort them. We can witness and affirm their feelings. We can seek to understand. We need to not minimize their pain or focus only on cheering them up, and we need to affirm our support and commitment. Now, I'm going to go through in more depth on each of these because I think this is what I want you to walk away with today. When I think about this idea of comforting one another, this is what I came to, is if we walk out of here today, I want us to have tangible, practical tools that we can take to go and comfort people in our lives that are hurting. So the first thing that I see is witness and affirm their feelings. So there's two pieces to this. There's the witnessing and there's the affirmation of how somebody feels. Now, it's important when we're sitting with somebody who is going through a difficult time to listen to the verbiage that's being used and to recognize the body language. If somebody tells you that they're heartbroken over something that's happened, don't mimic back to them that they're sad or that they're having a tough day. You have to understand that the words that they use have meaning. There's a reason that they chose the things that they chose. You have to also look at their body language and understand how they're feeling. If they're avoiding eye contact, if their shoulders are slumped, if they're crying, that's usually a dead giveaway, right? That these are difficult things that they're going through. And sometimes our past personal experiences can be helpful in relating to somebody. But we have to be really careful not to turn the table and make the story about us. When somebody is opening up and sharing their sufferings, when we turn and make it about us, we're diminishing their feelings. We're saying that their feelings are less important, and we're trying to change the focus back to us. So we have to be really careful. When we're using our stories, it's good to use our stories to empathize with somebody, but not to switch the focus. And one of the things that brought this home to me was the book of Job. I was reading through Job, and oftentimes when you read this story, you think about Job. And the premise of the story is that he is the most righteous man walking the earth at the time. And he loses his kids, he loses his livestock, he loses all of his crops, he loses everything except for his wife in this scenario. And his wife tells him to curse God and die. And so he is sitting in the dirt, scratching his sores, he has lost everything. And we read this in Job chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came, each from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Now, this was a tradition in the Jewish culture. It was called sitting Shiva. They were sitting with him in the dirt, in his suffering. They weren't saying anything. And this was the best thing that those friends did. When we think about Job's friends, we all think about what happens next, right? They opened their mouths. And when they opened their mouths, terrible things came out. They began talking to Job about all the things that he probably did wrong that brought this suffering upon himself, which is literally one of the worst things that you can say to somebody that's suffering or that's hurting. Well, this is probably your fault. Like, your sin brought this upon you. That does not help, right? Whether it's true or not, that's not for us to judge, right? God is going to deal with sin. That's not our job. We are to help people process through these things. And one of the things that Job says at the end of this is he says, "Sorry comforters are you all. How then will you vainly comfort me, for your answers remain full of falsehood?" Right? All four of them missed this critical element of seeking to understand him and seeking to understand what was going on. They just assumed, they just spoke over him that these were the things that were going on and he needed to repent in the midst of that. And this is the step they missed, which is the second thing I want to talk about, is seeking to understand. This is asking the what and the how questions, not the why questions. All of his friends were asking the why question. Job didn't know the answer. They didn't know the answer either. They were asking why this was happening instead of what was happening and how he was feeling about it. Keep in mind that he just lost his wife, or he just lost his kids. He just lost all of his livestock. He lost all of his wealth. Everything that he had, other than his wife, who was telling him to curse God and die, was gone. And they weren't asking him how he was processing that or how he was doing. They went immediately to, well, here's how you fix it. You repent. You do the things that you need to do. And we need to focus on listening. We need to focus on what the other person is going through. As a staff, we're going through a book right now. It's called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, and it's by a guy named Pete Scazzaro. And he says in this book that being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. In here, he talks about practicing the presence of people, of sitting with people in the midst of the things that they're going through. And he's saying that we need to be present with these people while they're struggling. We need to listen. We need to engage with them. And he borrows from a guy named David Benner, and he asks himself these 3 questions before being with somebody and even during his time with somebody. Am I fully present or distracted? Am I loving or judging? And third, am I open or closed to being changed? He says that our ability to ask ourselves these 3 questions before and during our time with someone and to respond in ways that are present, loving, and open is a great measure of our ability to be with them. And these were a gut punch for me because I'm not particularly good at this. One of the reasons that I ended up with so much stuff on my plate was that I look at myself as a high-capacity person. I'm always doing something. There's just very rarely a dull moment in my life where I'm not working on something. And what happens with this is that someone may come to my office while I'm working on something, and they may be talking to me, and I'll just continue working while talking to them, right? Like, for kids, I realize that this is now a thing. Kids don't know home row on typing. Like, they can't type without looking at their computer, but for those of you that are over 30, I assume that this is still a thing in your life. So I'll still be talking with the person and working on whatever I'm working because my brain can do this somehow, but I'm not actually present with that person. Right? I'm not showing them respect in the midst of that. I'm not valuing their time. And so this was a very big conviction for me. And the other conviction was this next one, because I'm guilty of this all the time. It's don't minimize their pain or focus only on cheering them up. Now, I've told you guys this before, and you probably picked up on this, but I am obnoxiously optimistic, right? I'm so positive that my blood type is B positive. Right? Like, it's flowing through me and I don't have a choice. All of the time, like, I'm always looking glass half full. And the hard thing for me is when I'm with somebody is making this discernment on, is this a tough day? Is this a difficult season that you're going through? Or is there some life-altering event that happened that I need to step into? Now, life-altering events are usually much easier to pick up. But someone that's going through a difficult season or someone that's had a tough day, I need more help in discerning, because if I'm around somebody who's just generally pessimistic, who's like the Debbie Downer personality, that sucks the life out of me. And it's really hard for me to be with that person. But I've learned a lot about this from other people. One of these people is our sweet friend. Her name is Dina. And Dina lost her husband, Craig, early in 2020, completely unexpectedly. And over the last 16 months, she's spent a lot of time with her counselor, with her friends, and just working through the grief and the pain that she's been through. And I'm really thankful that she shared this wisdom with me because she was watching our kids in December. She had sent Brent and I on a date night. It was a super sweet gesture. And when we came home, we were just talking about some of the things that she's been working through and talking through, and she shared this example that I thought was so good. And so I had called her up this week because I wanted to make sure that I got this right, and I followed up with her. And she said, okay, so imagine you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Okay, guys, I want you guys to close your eyes. Just picture you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You're just hanging on to a plank of wood, right? This is all you have. And you're just hanging on for your dear life. And the sun is beating down on you, and the rain is beating down on you at times. The waves are crashing over you. You're gulping in salt water. You have sharks that are nipping at your toes, and you're in this place where you are completely exhausted. And you look up, and you can see at a great distance, you can see your friends, and your friends are on the shore. And they're in ankle-deep water, or they're maybe just standing on the shore, and they're looking out at you. And they believe in this moment that they're with you. Right? They're with you in the water. But are they really with you? Do they have any concept of what's going on in and around you? You're being inundated with these things, these difficulties that continue to hit you wave after wave, the sun beating down, the sharks at your toes. There's 100 different things that you're struggling with that they can't see. But they believe in that moment that they're with you. And we have to understand that this is the reality. Right? When we're in this place, when we're in the middle of suffering, we're being bombarded by all sorts of feelings and all sorts of things that other people can't see. And we can't necessarily expect them to see that, but we have to sit with people in the midst of those troubles to say, I understand that you're going through things that I don't understand. And I'm okay to sit with you in the midst of this while you work through it. We need to allow people to feel their feelings and work through the pain or the sadness or the frustration, the anger, whatever it is that they're dealing with so that they can come to the other side of this. And it's going to lead us to the fourth step, which is affirm your support and commitment of these people. The major difficulty with this one is that there's no timeline for grief. If you've been through this in some major way, you know that this to be true, right? And you're probably familiar with the Kubler-Ross method of the 5 stages of grief, right? He talks about this idea of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And you can look at somebody who's grieving, somebody who's struggling with something, and these may be a helpful tool in identifying, like, hey, here's some of the things they're going through, but there's never a specific timeline to it. And that's what's really, really hard. August, for me, is going to mark 10 years since I lost my dad. And there's times that something will happen in my life where I'll want to talk to my dad about it, and I take out my phone and I go to call my dad, and then I realize there's no one there to answer. Those moments are terrible. They're always terrible, and they hit me at the most random times. Like the times that I miss my dad are so scattered and so random, and I can't expect somebody to sit with me in the midst of that and just know that, hey, at some point he's going to have a mental breakdown, and I need to be there for him. But I am so thankful for the people that have affirmed their support of me and have consistently shown up. So I know on August 11th, I'm going to receive 3 text messages. These 3 people have written me every single year to let me know I'm thinking about you and I'm praying for you because I know that this day sucks. And one of them has lost their dad. 2 of them are just being great friends. They put a reminder in their calendar that they want to make sure that they do not miss reaching out to me on that day. And that taught me a lot, that it's something that's so simple to do, but it's something that we have to do. We have to continue to show up. I shared with you guys in early March, this actually happened in late February, that my best friend from college, Tristan, and his wife, Emily, lost their baby at 34 weeks. And this was our 3rd friend in the last 5 years that's had to deliver their baby stillborn. I have no concept of what Tristan and Emily are going through. I don't have a relatable experience that I can share with them in the midst of that. The only things that I can do is I can continue to show up for him. Now, 4 months later, most people have moved on with their lives. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's not a knock on those people because their lives are continuing to move. But I know that every day his reality has now been changed. that it's being shaped and it's being molded by the experience that him and Emily and their daughter Jane went through in losing Harriet. And so any time that I reach out to him, I'm always cognizant of that. I put reminders in to pray for him. Every time I think of him, I just stop and pray. That's something God's challenged me on of, don't tell someone, hey, I'm going to pray for you, because if you're like me, you forget, right? Like, it's not that you don't want to pray for that person, but you just forget. So when I think of somebody, I just stop and I pray for him. And then I send him a text message. I was thinking about you. I was praying for you. Let me know if there's anything specific I can pray or any way that I can come alongside you. It's super simple, but it's something that is really helpful in walking through this. And Dina shared something else with me that I thought was so good. She had a friend that called her up and said, hey, my husband and I are going to come over, and he's just going to go around the house, and he's going to fix things. And we're going to sit, and we're going to hang out. And Dina was like, oh, that's great. Like, I don't think there's really things to be fixed, but that's super nice. And they came over, and there actually were a handful of things that he found that she would have never seen or never known, because those are things that Craig handled for over 20 years. And so he went around and he fixed things, and they sat and they talked together. And I thought this was such a perfect picture of a way to show up for somebody. There's a million different things you can do. You may not be a handy person at all, so fixing things around someone's house may be a horrible idea for you. You may actually do more damage than help, but know yourself. Know the things you can do. Show up with a meal. Bring them coffee. Do yard work for them. Invite them to a game night. Take them to a movie when a good movie actually comes to theaters again. Like, find a way to come alongside this person, right? That list can literally go on and on and on. And when you think about widows and orphans, this is something that James tells us is pure religion, to be with widows and orphans in their affliction. He's telling us we need to show up in their affliction. It's not saying that we need to be at a distance. He's saying being with them, being present, being a faithful presence in their lives in the midst of their suffering. So the takeaway from this is really simple. Show up, do something, then keep showing up and keep doing things, right? This isn't going to end for them after a day, a week, a month, a year. The things, these life-altering events that people struggle with, there's always a way to show up for somebody. And even if it's not a life-altering event, showing up for somebody and asking, how can I pray for you? What's going on? Are there ways that I can just sit with you right now and be a non-anxious presence for you to process through your grief? That is a transformational thing for us. It's a way that we can orient our lives to help other people. And one of the biggest things that I want to say, because this is a lesson I've learned the hard way from doing this far too many times, is when somebody is struggling, one of the things that we all too often say is, if I can do anything, let me know. We've all said it, right? Like, as soon as I said those words, you're like, yep, totally said that. I've said that so many times to people. But the reality is, when you're in the middle of that ocean and you have 50 different things going wrong, you don't know what you need. When you're going through extreme grief, extreme pain, you don't know what you need. And you're not going to ask for it. As much as you may think this person will reach out to me if they actually need something, they won't, because they don't know and they don't want to feel like a burden to you. So that's why it's so important for us to just show up in the midst of this. And we need to keep showing up. All right, I know that was a lot. And I wanted to keep this like manageable for you and giving you the 4 and 4 and helping you to think through this in 2 ways and understanding that pain is not all bad, that there are things that we can learn from and we can grow from in pain, that pain is going to teach us how to comfort other people that are going through similar trials. It's going to strengthen us for what lies ahead in our own lives. It's going to reveal things that may be standing in the way of our own relationship with Jesus or putting him on display for others. And it's also going to stir up this hope in the age to come. There's this beautiful passage in Ecclesiastes that says that God has set eternity in man's heart, that we long for something better than this, that we know there has to be something better than this. And this is what despair and this is what pain does to us, is that it makes us look forward to something better to come. And then I just explained these 4 things that I want us to really focus on this week. Part of this series is trying to be really tangible in the way that we approach our faith. This is supposed to be the Christianity 101, the things that we just do for people. So we need to witness and affirm people's feelings. We need to seek to understand what they're going through. We need to ask the what and the how questions and leave alone the why questions. We cannot minimize their pain or try to cheer them up and pull them out. When someone is going through something, you're never going to say the perfect thing that will end their grief or their sorrow. That's pressure that we put on ourselves, that I don't want to say the wrong thing. And so we say nothing. And it's okay to sit with somebody and to say, listen, I don't know what to say, but I just want to be a faithful and non-anxious presence for you here. I want to pray with you. I want to pray for you. I want to come alongside you because that's the best I know how to do. And that is so much better than trying to think that we're going to say the perfect thing that's going to end their grief. And that last piece, that we need to affirm our support and commitment of other people. It's so critical that we realize this is a skill that we can all work towards. Right? I admitted in the very beginning, this is not a strength of mine. So this sermon was a huge conviction for me, where God's pointing this out in my life of saying, yeah, you've done okay with this, but here are 6 other people that you really need to reach back out to, that you need to circle back with. And my guess is if I just asked you right now to think of some people who could use some comfort in your life, it probably isn't going to take you long to come up with that list. And so I'm going to pray right now, and I'm just going to lead us in a little prayer. And I want you to think about these people. If you have your phone, you can take a note. If you have something that you can write with, take a note of these people's names, because I want you to reach out to these people this week. I want you to try and enter into this as best you can. So would you guys pray with me? King Jesus, we long for the day that you will come again. You give us this beautiful promise in Revelation of every tear being wiped away, of death being no more, of no more sin, of you just being at the center of all that we know and all that we see, lighting up your new kingdom. And God, that is such a beautiful thing, where there is no more war, no more sickness, no more death, no more tears, the things that we struggle with all going away. We won't need hope anymore because our hope will be present with you. Our faith will be our sight, and our love will be the only thing remaining that we bring, because we know that this is the currency of the kingdom. But right now, God, we're hurting. I know that as I was teaching today, I can look around the room and I can see people that are dealing with hurts. God, I pray that you would meet us there. This passage in 2 Corinthians tells us that we only comfort as we learn to be comforted by you. That as we spend time in your presence, we learn what it looks like to be comforted by the God of all comfort. And that we can take that and we can then be that for somebody else. Lord, I pray that as we read through 2 Corinthians this week again and again and again, that we recognize that nothing happens by accident. God, the things we have been through have given us a platform to minister to other people, to care for other parts of the body. And God, that we would stand apart as a place where the broken and the hurting are welcome. So Lord, I thank you again for this message, for this time, for this opportunity to dive into your word, to be challenged, to be encouraged, and Lord, hopefully to be changed by your word. And all your people said. So we're going to take communion during this next time, and I'm going to have the ushers come, and they're going to stand up front, and I want you to take communion on your own time. As I was thinking about communion this week, I was thinking about how Jesus was comforting his disciples. And he has this moment in the upper room where he's with his disciples and he washes their feet and they're having this meal and he's telling them what's coming. And one of the things that Jesus says is that in this world you will have suffering, but take heart because I've overcome the world. He gives this picture that suffering is going to happen, but to have hope, to take heart, to be encouraged to know that he has overcome the world. And so I want you during this next song to come and take it on your own time, to sit in this moment and thank God that we have hope, that this world is not all there is. And again, to think through the conversations that need to be had this week and to begin praying for those people who need comfort from you this week. So I'm going to dismiss you this time and I'll be up here at the end.